Clara Voss's knees hit the saloon floor so hard she tasted copper. The boot that put her there belonged to the same man who held her dead husband's debt her days in every ounce of dignity she had left. She didn't cry. She had forgotten how. But what Silas Rourke didn't know, what nobody in the dust-choked town of Millhaven, Arizona knew, was that a stranger had just tied his horse outside, a man with a scar down his arm and a past he couldn't outrun. And he had seen everything. If this story grips you from the very first line, hit that subscribe button and stay with me all the way to the end. I promise you this one is going to hit different. And drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The boot caught Clara right below the ribs. She went down sideways, her hip slamming the edge of a wooden chair before she crumpled onto the sticky floorboards of the amber rail saloon. A half-full bucket of gray water tipped with her, soaking her dress, her hair, her hands. The rag she had been using to scrub the floor landed 2 feet away like a dead thing. Nobody moved. 14 men sat in that saloon. Cowboys, miners, drifters, 14 pairs of eyes watching a 22-year-old woman hit the ground, and not one of them so much as shifted in his seat. I told you. Silas Rourke's voice was calm. That was the worst part. He never yelled. He spoke the way a man talks about the weather. I told you the corner by the stairs needed doing first. Didn't I tell you that Clara... Yes, Mr. Rourke. Then why am I looking at a dirty corner in a clean spot that nobody sits in? I was going to get to it. She got up. She always got up. Her ribs screamed where the boot had landed right on top of last week's bruise, the one that hadn't finished yellowing yet. She pressed her hand against her side and straightened her spine. She would not hunch. She would not give him the satisfaction. Silas Rourke stood 6 feet tall with a gut that hung over his belt like a sack of grain. His face was permanently red, not from anger, but from whiskey and the Arizona heat that sat on Millhaven like a slow curse. He wore a silver watch chain across his vest, polished every morning by Clara's own hands. He owned the amber rail. He owned the dry goods store next door. He held the debts of half the town. And for the last 8 months, he had owned Clara Voss. The corner, Clara, now. Yes, Mr. Rourke. She picked up the rag, wrung it out with hands that shook only slightly, and crawled toward the stairs on her hands and knees. Behind her, she heard Rourke settle back into his chair at the head table. She heard him snap his fingers. Aldous, another whiskey. Deputy Frank Aldous, 28 years old, tin star on his chest, conscience buried somewhere he couldn't find it anymore, poured the drink himself. He set it down in front of Rourke and walked back to his spot by the door. He did not look at Clara. He never looked at Clara. She scrubbed. The pine tar soap bit into the cracks on her knuckles. The summer heat turned the saloon into an oven. Sweat rolled down her neck and dripped onto the board she had just cleaned. Somewhere outside, a horse whinnied the sound of hooves on hard-packed dirt, another stranger passing through a town that swallowed strangers whole. You missed a spot. Clara closed her eyes. She had not missed a spot. She never missed a spot. I don't see a spot, Mr. Rourke. The room went quiet. Even the flies stopped. Clara felt the silence land on her shoulders like a yoke. She had talked back. After 8 months, she had talked back. She knew better, but the heat and the pain in her ribs in the 14th day without a full meal and something deeper, something that had been hardening inside her like cooling iron, something cracked. Rourke's chair scraped against the floor. His boots were loud. Thud, thud, thud. What did you say to me? Clara gripped the rag, her jaw tightened. I said I don't see a spot, sir. His shadow fell over her. She could smell the whiskey, the cigar smoke, the pomade on his thinning hair. Stand up. She stood. Look at me. She looked. His eyes were small and mean, the color of dirty water. He smiled. It was worse than a frown. Your husband owed me $412 when he died, Clara. You remember that number every day. You've worked off $63 in 8 months. At this rate, you'll be free and... He made a show of counting on his fingers. Oh, about 5 years, give or take. That's 5 years of my floor, my food, my roof. 5 years of yes, Mr. Rourke, and no, Mr. Rourke. So when I tell you there's a spot, even if the floor is clean enough to eat off. Do you understand? I understand. Good girl. He patted her cheek, not gently, hard enough to sting. Now finish up. Supper crowd's coming in an hour, and this place smells like wet dog. He walked back to his table. He picked up his whiskey. The room exhaled. The miners went back to their cards. The world kept turning. And Clara Voss got back on her knees. That was when the door opened. The light hit first a blade of white Arizona sun cutting through the dim saloon, making everyone squint. Then a shape filled the doorway, and the light was gone. He wasn't as big as a mountain. He was lean, hard built, the way a man gets built when every meal is earned and every mile is walked. He wore a sweat-stained hat pulled low, a duster coat that had seen better years, and boots caked in trail dust. His left arm bore a scar that ran from his wrist to his elbow, visible below his rolled sleeve, a thick raised rope of healed flesh. He hadn't bothered to hide it. Ethan Cole hadn't planned on stopping in Millhaven. He had delivered 40 head of cattle to the Garrett Ranch 12 miles east and was supposed to ride straight through to Tucson. But his horse had thrown a shoe 2 miles out, and a horse without a shoe in Arizona summer was a horse headed for death. He stepped inside, his eyes adjusted. He took in the room in 3 seconds. 14 men, 1 woman on the floor, 1 man at the head table with the look of a king on a cheap throne. He walked to the bar. Beer. His voice was quiet, not soft quiet, the kind of quiet that came from years of choosing words carefully because the wrong ones got people killed. The bartender, a thin man named Ned with a nervous Adam's apple, slid a glass across the wood. Passing through. Need a farrier. Horse threw a shoe. Max the smithy is down the street. Won't be open till morning, though. Heat gets to him. Ethan nodded. He took a drink. The beer was warm and tasted like tin. He didn't care. He was watching the woman on the floor in the reflection of the mirror behind the bar. She was young, too thin, moving the way a person moves when every part of them hurts, but stopping isn't an option. He watched Rourke snap his fingers again. Clara, the spittoon. She stood tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear and walked to the first brass spittoon by the card table. She picked it up with both hands, brown tobacco juice sloshed against the rim. She carried it toward the back door. As she passed Rourke's table, his boot shot out. It was not an accident. His leg extended deliberately, catching her shin. Clara stumbled forward. The spittoon tipped. A wave of brown filth splashed across the floor she had just scrubbed. Rourke threw his head back and laughed. 2 of the miners at the nearest table laughed with him. Deputy Aldous looked at his boots. Better clean that up, too, sweetheart. Clara stood there. The tobacco juice soaked into her hem. Her hands trembled at her sides. She didn't cry. She looked straight ahead at nothing and everything the way people look when they have been hollowed out. Ethan set his beer down. That's enough. The words cut through the noise like a knife through rope. Simple, flat, final. Rourke turned his head slowly. He looked at Ethan the way a man looks at a stain on his shirt. Excuse me? I said that's enough. You made your point. The room shifted. Men leaned back in their chairs. Aldous' hand drifted toward his hip. Ned stopped breathing. Rourke smiled. He pushed back from his table and stood. He was taller than Ethan by 2 inches and outweighed him by 50 pounds. He walked to the bar with the casual swagger of a man who had never lost a fight in his own establishment. Friend, I don't believe I know you. You don't. Then let me introduce how things work in Millhaven. Rourke leaned against the bar close enough that Ethan could count the veins in his nose. That girl over there owes me money. A lot of money. Her dead husband's debt. She works it off under my roof, eating my food, sleeping in my storeroom. I am doing her a Christian kindness. Does that clear things up for you? Ethan looked at him. Then he looked at Clara, who stood frozen, holding the empty spittoon, her eyes wide with something between hope and terror. How much? Ethan asked. Rourke blinked. How much what? The debt. How much does she owe you? Rourke laughed louder this time, playing to the room. You want to buy her debt, cowboy? You don't look like you could afford a second beer. I asked you a number. The laughter died. Something in Ethan's voice killed it. It was the voice of a man who had asked questions in rooms where the answers mattered, and people who lied didn't leave standing. Rourke's smile thinned. $349. That's with interest. Her husband owed $412, Clara said suddenly. Everyone looked at her. She swallowed hard, but she didn't look away. I've been here 8 months, Mr. Rourke. $63 you said yourself. That would be $349. But last month you said the debt was $370, and the month before $360. Silence. Rourke's face went from red to purple. You calling me a liar, girl? I'm calling the numbers wrong. Rourke took 1 step toward her. Ethan moved. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply stepped between them, his body a wall. His hand didn't go to the revolver on his hip, but his duster shifted and the handle was visible. Worn. Used. I wouldn't, Ethan said quietly. Rourke's eyes dropped to the gun, then back up to Ethan's face. For a long moment, the 2 men stood there. The heat pressed down. A bead of sweat rolled down Rourke's temple. Aldous. Rourke did not break eye contact with Ethan. Escort this gentleman out of my saloon. Deputy Aldous stepped forward, but his feet were heavy. He stopped 3 feet away. Mister, you'd best. I'll leave when my beer's finished, Ethan said. He turned his back on Rourke. He sat down at the bar. He picked up his glass. He drank. It was the most insulting thing a man could do in a room full of armed men. Turn his back. It said, I do not consider you a threat. It said you are not worth my attention. Rourke's hand twitched toward the derringer he kept in his vest pocket. But 14 men were watching. 14 men who owed him money, yes. But 14 men who also had tongues that wagged. Shooting an unarmed man in the back, even in Millhaven, had consequences. Finish your beer, Rourke said, his voice like broken glass. Then get out of my town. He turned and walked back to his table. He sat down. He snapped his fingers. Clara, storeroom, now. Clara set the spittoon down. She walked toward the back of the saloon without looking at Ethan. But as she passed him, she whispered 2 words so quiet only he could hear. Don't stay. The storeroom door closed behind her. The lock turned from the outside. Rourke pocketed the key. Bang. Ethan finished his beer. He stood, put a coin on the bar, and walked outside into the blast furnace of Arizona summer. He stood on the boardwalk and let the heat punish him while his mind worked. Don't stay. She had said it to protect him. A woman who had been kicked, humiliated, and locked in a storeroom had used her only moment of freedom to warn a stranger. To save him. Ethan looked down the street. Max the smithy was dark. The town was quiet in the afternoon heat, 2 dogs sleeping in the shade of a water trough, dust hanging in the air like a judgment. An older Mexican woman sat on a bench outside a dress shop stitching fabric. She looked up when Ethan stopped and their eyes met. She was perhaps 50 with strong hands and sharp eyes that had seen too much and forgotten none of it. She didn't look away. She didn't look afraid. You're the one who talked back to Rourke, she said. It was not a question. Word travels fast. In Millhaven, words are the only thing that move faster than fists. She set her stitching down. My name is Rosa Mendez. I own this shop, and if you're smart, you'll get on your horse and ride. Horse through a shoe, then you're not smart and you're not lucky. She stood and walked to her doorway. But you might be something else. What's that? She looked back at him from the threshold. Necessary. She stepped inside, but she did not close the door all the way. Ethan followed. The shop was small and crowded bolts of fabric, half-finished dresses on wooden forms, the smell of cut cloth and cedar. Rosa poured coffee from a tin pot without asking whether he wanted any. She set the cup in front of him at her work table and sat down across from it. That girl in there, Rosa said without preamble. Clara Voss. Her husband Daniel was a good man. He borrowed $200 from Rourke last spring to buy medicine when the fever hit. Rourke charged him double. Daniel died owing $400. Then Rourke added fees, interest, penalties. Every month the number grows. Clara will never pay it off. That's the point. Why doesn't someone help her? Rosa laughed, but it was the kind of laugh with no joy in it. Help her with what money? Nobody has money. The law, Rourke is the law. He's justice of the peace. He writes the contracts, sets the interest, decides when a debt is paid. And he will never decide it's paid because a woman scrubbing his floor and emptying his spittoons is worth more to him than any dollar amount. Ethan looked back toward the saloon. He hits her. Every day, in front of everyone. It keeps the rest of us in line. Rosa's voice dropped. He keeps a ledger in his office safe. Every debt in this town. I've heard things about that ledger, numbers that don't add up. Debts that were paid but never marked. She stopped herself. But that's just an old woman talking. You should go, mister. There's nothing here for you. She said it, but she hadn't poured the coffee for a man she expected to leave. Tell me about the ledger. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she stood and walked to the back of the shop. She moved a heavy dresser aside, knelt down, and pried up a floorboard. She pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She set it on the table and unwrapped it. Inside were scraps of paper, dozens of them written in different hands, different inks, receipts, notes, tallies. Every person Rourke has cheated who was brave enough to write it down and give it to me, Rosa said. 17 families. Some paid twice what they owed. Some paid in full and still show a balance. Old widow Garner paid off her husband's debt 3 years ago. Rourke's ledger still shows her owing $160. She cleans his church every Sunday because she thinks God will damn her if she doesn't pay what she owes. Ethan spread the papers out. His jaw worked as he read through them. This is enough to bring a territorial judge down here. A territorial judge who is appointed by a governor who plays cards with Rourke every time he passes through. Rosa shook her head. I tried 2 years ago. I wrote a letter to the judge in Tucson, 6 pages, everything I knew. The letter never arrived. The mail writer told me it must have been lost. But I saw Rourke reading it in his office the next week. He looked right at me through the window and smiled. Ethan gathered the papers carefully and wrapped them back in the oilcloth. I need to see that ledger myself, the real one. If I can compare what's in his safe with what's in these papers, you'll have a dead man's case, Rosa said, because that's what you'll be. Maybe, maybe not. She looked at him. Why do you care? You rode into this town this morning. You don't know us. You don't owe us anything. Ethan looked at her hand resting on the table beside the oilcloth bundle. He thought about a road he had left behind, about a family he had never met again. 5 years ago, he said, I watched a family lose everything they had because I followed orders instead of my conscience. I walked away clean. They didn't. I've been trying to ride far enough to forget that. Turns out there's no such distance. Rosa looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, not warmly, but with the gravity of a woman who had been waiting a long time for the right words from the right person. Keep these hidden, Ethan said, pushing the bundle back across the table. Don't tell anyone I was here. He stood to leave. Mister? Rosa spoke to his back. There's something else you should know about Daniel Voss. She paused. Old Cutter, the man who runs the livery at the end of the street, he was there the night Daniel died. He saw something. Ask him. Ethan stopped. He turned. Ask him what he saw in the storeroom. He walked out into the heat. Duh! The livery stable sat at the far end of Millhaven's single street, weather-beaten, and listing slightly to the left as if the building itself had grown tired of standing straight. An old man sat outside on an upturned crate, one eye milky white with cataracts, the other sharp as an eagle's. He was braiding a leather strap with gnarled fingers that moved from memory. You old Cutter? Ethan asked. The old man didn't look up. Depends on who's asking and why. I need a place to sleep tonight, and I need to know everything about Silas Rourke. Now the old man looked up. His one good eye studied Ethan with the intensity of a man who had survived long enough to know which strangers brought trouble and which brought deliverance. Sleeping's $1, Cutter said. Information costs more. Name your price. There ain't enough money in Arizona territory to buy what you're asking for, son. But there might be enough guts. He put down his braiding. Rourke's been running this town for 11 years. Came in with nothing and bought the saloon with money nobody could trace. Made himself justice of the peace because nobody else wanted the job. He lends money to anyone who asks and charges rates that would make a New York banker blush. He spat into the dust. 3 men tried to stand against him. First was a miner named Hollis challenged Rourke's math on his debt. Had an accident in the mine the next day. Second was a rancher named Davis threatened to ride to Tucson and file a complaint. Davis's barn burned that same night with his horses inside. Third was a preacher. Young fella came through preaching about justice and righteousness. Cutter paused. He left town in the middle of the night. They found his Bible in a ditch. Never found him. Ethan absorbed this. And the deputy, Frank Aldis. Cutter spat again. Aldis has got a conscience. It's buried under Rourke's payroll, but it's there. He was a decent kid once. Now he's a jig on a leash. He knows what Rourke does is wrong. You can see it eating him alive. But knowing and doing are 2 different animals. And Clara Voss. Cutter's weathered face softened for just a moment. Sweetest soul in this God-forsaken town. Her daddy was a school teacher. In Missouri, taught her to read, write do figures in her head faster than any man I know. She married Daniel Voss because he had kind eyes and big dreams. He wanted to build a cattle operation out east of town. Cutter's voice dropped. When Daniel got the fever, Rourke wouldn't give him a single day's grace on the debt. Daniel died in that storeroom, same one Rourke locks Clara in now. Died on the floor like a dog. Ethan's jaw tightened. She stays because of the debt. She stays because Rourke told her if she runs, he'll have the territorial marshal arrest her for theft. Says the money's still owed and fleeing makes it a criminal matter. It's hogwash, no marshal would touch it. But Clara doesn't know that. She's never been more than 30 miles from where she was born. Rourke's counting on her fear. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I need to ask you something else. Rosa Mendez said you were in the storeroom the night Daniel died. Old Cutter went very still. The braiding stayed in his hands, but his fingers stopped moving. The one good eye fixed on the middle distance, somewhere past the street, past the buildings, past the heat shimmer on the desert horizon. He said at last. What did you see? A long silence. A horse shifted in the stable behind them. Somewhere down the street, a door banged in the wind. Daniel was sick, Cutter said slowly. Real sick. Couldn't walk by then. I went by to leave him some broth that Rose had sent over. The back door of the saloon was open. I went in. He stopped. Go on. Rourke was in there, standing over Daniel. Cutter's voice had gone flat, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this 1,000 times in his own head in the dark. The door to the street, the storeroom door, was closed, locked from the outside. I could hear Daniel breathing hard. Rourke saw me. He said, nothing to see here, old man. Man's just resting. But his face, Cutter shook his head. I left. I shouldn't have left. 2 hours later, they were saying Daniel was dead. Ethan waited. Daniel was sick, Cutter said. He might have died anyway, I don't know. But I know the door was locked from outside that night. And I know Rourke was in there, and I know the look on his face when he saw me. His one good eye found Ethan's. I've been carrying that for 8 months. Telling myself it wasn't my business. Telling myself I didn't know for certain. He set the braiding down on the crate, but a man can only carry a thing so long before it starts to carry him. Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out a silver dollar. He set it on the crate next to the braiding. I'll take that place to sleep. Stall in the back. Got clean hay. It ain't the Prentice house, but it's dry. Cutter picked up the dollar, then he stopped. Cowboy. Yeah, that scar on your arm. I've seen marks like that before. Comanche blade. Ethan looked at his arm, at the thick raised scar running from wrist to elbow. No, he said. Muzzle flash, when I threw my gun off a cliff. Cutter looked at him steadily. Then you already know something about choosing. I do. And you're staying anyway. Ethan looked back down the street toward the amber rail. The saloon glowed in the evening light. Somewhere inside, behind a locked door, Clara Voss was sitting in the dark. Yeah, he said, I'm staying. He walked into the livery stable. He unsaddled his horse, laid his bedroll on the hay, checked his revolver, 6 chambers, all loaded, and placed it within arm's reach. The last light of the Arizona sun bled through the cracks in the stable walls. Tomorrow the smithy would fix his horse's shoe. Tomorrow he could ride to Tucson and forget Millhaven ever existed. But Ethan Cole had spent 5 years riding away from things that mattered. He had spent 5 years sending money he could barely afford to a family in San Antonio. A family whose father walked with a cane. Now because of a bullet Ethan had fired in a moment of panic and terrible judgment. He had spent 5 years believing that the act of leaving was the same as the act of repair. It wasn't. He closed his eyes. For the first time and longer than he could remember, he did not dream about the road behind him. He dreamed about 2 words, a woman's voice fierce and quiet beneath the noise of a crowded saloon. Don't stay. She had said it to save him. He was going to stay to save her. And Silas Rourke's world was about to crack wide open. Chapter 2. Ethan woke before dawn to the sound of someone crying. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of crying a person does when they have trained themselves to be silent, when the sound gets trapped in the chest and leaks out in ragged, choked breaths. He sat up in the hay, hand already on his revolver, body rigid. The sound was coming from the back wall of the livery stable, the wall that shared a boundary with the amber rails storeroom. He pressed his ear against the rough timber. He could hear her breathing hard, whispering something he couldn't make out, and then a thud, the sound of a fist hitting wood. Not breaking it, just hitting it because there was nothing else to hit. Ethan pulled his ear away. He sat in the dark with his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Old Cutter's voice came from the far stall, barely above a murmur. She does that most mornings. Lets it out before he unlocks the door at 5. A pause. He locks her in every night since Daniel died. Says it's for her own protection. Says a woman alone needs walls around her. Cutter's one good eye caught the thin light leaking through the slats. Walls in a lock she ain't got the key to. Ethan stood. He buckled his gun belt, pulled on his boots. The ledger, he said quietly. Rourke's safe, you know where it is. Office behind the bar, iron box combination lock. He's the only one who knows the numbers. Cutter paused. Except maybe Aldous, when Rourke's too drunk to close up. And Clara, she cleans the office every Tuesday. Ethan looked at the wall. The crying had stopped. He heard the scrape of a bolt being drawn back, a door opening. Rourke's voice muffled, but unmistakable. Up. Coffee isn't going to make itself. Ethan walked out of the stable into the pale gray light. The heat was already building. By noon, it would be unbearable. He crossed the street and stopped in front of Rosa's dress shop. A lamp burned behind the curtains. He knocked twice. Rosa opened the door. She was not surprised to see him. "You didn't leave." "No, ma'am." "Then you're either brave or stupid. Come in before someone sees you." He told her about Cutter, about what the old man had seen. Rosa sat very still as he spoke. Her coffee cup was in her hands, but she did not drink. When he finished, the silence in the small shop was the kind that comes after something is said aloud for the first time, something that had been true for a long time but had lived only in whispered suspicion, never in the clean, terrible light of stated fact. "He locked the door," Rosa said. From the outside, while Daniel was inside, Rosa set her cup down. She pressed both hands flat on the work table and looked at them. "Clara doesn't know," Ethan said. Cutter never told her. "No, he was afraid. We were all afraid." She looked up. "Does it change what you're planning?" "It changes what we're fighting for." A long pause. Rosa stood and walked to the window. She lifted the curtain an inch, checked the street, let it fall back. "She was looking for something," Rosa said quietly. "After Daniel died, she went through his things, what little there was. She told me once very quietly that Daniel had been writing her a letter when the fever got bad, that he had left it somewhere for her. She never found it." Rosa turned. "Rourke went through that storeroom before anyone else could. Took it everything." Ethan looked at her. "A letter," he said. "I don't know what was in it. Clara only knew it existed because Daniel had told her about it the morning before he lost consciousness. He said," Rosa's voice was careful, measured. "He said he had written down what he was afraid of, what he suspected about the debt. He wanted her to have it in case something happened." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "In the safe," he thought, along with the ledger. "I need to get Aldous alone," he said, "away from Rourke. He drinks at the creek crossing every evening after his rounds, about a mile south. Goes there to be alone." Rosa picked up her coffee. "I think the boy is wrestling with his demons, but the demons have been winning for 3 years. Not for much longer." Rosa looked at him over the rim of her cup. There was something in her eyes that had not been there when he first walked in, something that had been asleep for a very long time. "Mister," she said, "and what's your name?" "Ethan Cole." She nodded slowly. "Don't get killed, Ethan Cole." He walked out into the morning. Akim. The amber rail was already open. In a town like Millhaven, the saloon never really closed. Ethan pushed through the doors and took the same seat at the bar he'd had the afternoon before. Ned slid a beer in front of him without being asked. "Breakfast of champions," Ned muttered. Clara was mopping the floor near the back hallway. She didn't look up when Ethan came in, but her shoulders tightened. She mopped faster. Rourke wasn't in the room yet. Deputy Aldous sat at a corner table eating eggs from a tin plate, watching Ethan with nervous eyes. Ethan drank his beer slowly. He waited. Clara worked her way closer to the bar, mopping in long, efficient strokes. When she was within earshot, Ethan spoke without turning his head. "You clean his office on Tuesdays." Clara's mop stopped for half a second. Then it started again. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The safe in the back. The ledger. I need to see it. You need to leave this town." "I'm not leaving." "Then you need to stop talking to me." Her voice was barely above a breath. "He watches. He always watches. If he thinks I'm talking to you, it won't be a kick. It'll be worse." "What's worse?" Clara's hands tightened on the mop handle. "Last winter, a cowherd named Paulson bought me a plate of food at the counter. Just slid it across, didn't say a word. Rourke saw it. He broke 3 of Paulson's fingers and made me watch. Then he didn't feed me for 4 days." She swallowed. "So please, whatever you think you're doing, stop." Ethan turned on his stool and looked at her directly. She was thin, too thin, with dark circles under her eyes and a bruise on her collarbone that disappeared beneath her dress. But her eyes were sharp, clear. The eyes of a woman who had not stopped thinking even when thinking was all she had left. "Your husband borrowed $200, Ethan said quietly. "Rourke inflated it to 400. He's been adding phantom charges every month. You'll never pay it off because the number only goes up. It's not a debt, Clara. It's a cage." Clara stopped mopping. Her knuckles went white around the handle. "How do you know what Daniel owed?" "Because there are people in this town who kept records. Real records." For the first time, Clara looked at him fully. Her eyes searched his face. He could see the war behind them. Hope fighting with terror, trust clawing against years of betrayal. "If he finds out," "He won't, not yet. But I need that ledger and you're the only one who gets near it." Heavy boots on the stairs. Rourke was coming down from his room above the saloon. Clara grabbed her mop and drove it into the bucket so hard water sloshed over the rim. She turned her back on Ethan and mopped toward the far wall. Rourke appeared at the bottom of the stair, Stairs buttoning his vest, his eyes already scanning the room with the practiced vigilance of a man who trusted nobody. His gaze landed on Ethan. "You're still here. Horse isn't fixed yet. Mac opens at 7, it's 9. He's out of nails for the shoe, waiting on a delivery from Tucson." It was a lie. Ethan hadn't spoken to Mac, but Rourke didn't know that. Rourke grunted and walked to his table. He snapped his fingers. "Clara, eggs, and don't burn them this time or I'll burn you." Clara disappeared into the kitchen. Rourke sat down and spread a newspaper across the table. He didn't read it. He watched Ethan over the top of the page. "Aldous." The deputy looked up from his plate. "Sir, find out who this cowboy is, where he came from, what he wants." "Yes, sir." "And Aldous, if Mac really is out of horseshoe nails, you ride to Tucson today and bring some back. I want this man on his horse and out of my town by sundown tomorrow." Aldous stood up, wiped his mouth, and walked toward the door. As he passed Ethan, their eyes met. Ethan saw it clearly in the deputy's face: shame. Not anger, not loyalty, just the slow, grinding shame of a man who had sold his spine one small compromise at a time. "Deputy," Ethan said. Aldous stopped. "You ever get tired of fetching?" Aldous' jaw tightened. He pushed through the swinging doors and was gone. That evening, Ethan rode a borrowed horse south, following the creek to where the water cut through red rock in a thin silver ribbon, barely enough to wet a bandana. Aldous was there, sitting on a boulder with a bottle of cheap whiskey between his boots, his tin star catching the last light. He saw Ethan coming and his hand went to his pistol, then dropped. "Relax," Ethan said, dismounting. "If I wanted to shoot you, I'd have done it at the saloon. What do you want?" Ethan sat on a rock across from him. "How long have you been working for Rourke?" 3 years. He hired me when the last deputy left town. Left or was run out." Aldous took a drink. He didn't answer. "I'm going to ask you something," Ethan said, "and I want you to think before you answer. You know that ledger in Rourke's safe." Aldous' face closed up like a shuttered window. "I don't know anything about any ledger." "Yeah, you do. You've seen it. You've probably seen numbers that didn't make sense, debts that should have been paid off years ago still showing balances. You've seen it and you've done nothing. Because doing something means losing the only job you've got, and maybe your life." Aldous stared at the creek. His Adam's apple bobbed. "I ain't a bad man," he whispered. "I didn't say you were. I needed the work. My mother's sick in Prescott. I send her money every month." "I'm not here to judge you, Frank." Ethan's voice was even. "I'm here to give you a chance to stop being the man you hate." He leaned forward. "I need you to understand something about me first. I wore a badge too once. Texas Rangers. I worked for a man who burned families out of their homes and called it progress. I followed orders until I couldn't, and then I walked away." He paused. "You know what walking away got me?" Aldous looked up. "Nothing. It got me nothing. The family still lost their land. The captain still got promoted. I spent 5 years hating myself because I thought refusing was enough. It wasn't. Refusing is just the beginning. You have to act." The creek moved over its stones. A hawk circled overhead in the last light. "Then there was the other thing," Ethan said. He looked at the scar on his arm. "I shot a man. In the confusion of a chase, a man I took for an outlaw, and he wasn't. He was a father riding home. He lived. But he walks with a cane now, and his children watch him limp across their yard every morning, and every month I send money I can barely afford because the only thing worse than what I did is pretending it didn't happen." He looked at Aldous. "I'm not a hero, Frank. I'm just a man who is tired of being the person he became." Aldous stared at the creek for a long time. "What are you asking me to do?" he said at last. "I'm asking you for the combination to that safe." The silence stretched out so long that Ethan could hear the water moving over the stones. A hawk made one last slow circle and disappeared behind the canyon wall. Aldous' face went through a dozen expressions: fear, anger, hope, despair. He picked up the bottle. He turned it in his hands. "If he finds out," he said, "he'll kill me. If he doesn't find out, he'll keep killing her, slowly. One kick at a time, one Saturday at a time. And you'll pour his drinks and look at your boots and send money to your mother with blood on it." Aldous flinched as though he'd been struck. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair. Fair left Millhaven a long time ago." Aldous picked up the bottle. He took one last drink, long and slow, the drink of a man saying goodbye to something. Then he poured the rest out onto the red dirt and watched it soak in. 7:32:15, he said. Ethan committed it to memory. "When does Rourke leave the office unattended?" "Thursdays. He rides out to the Garrett Ranch to collect payments. Takes most of the afternoon. Clara's usually alone cleaning while he's gone. Thursday, Ethan stood. 2 days. Cassidy, Aldous' voice cracked. If this goes wrong, don't tell him I helped. Please. Your mother raised a better man than you've been, Ethan said. Time to prove her right. He mounted his borrowed horse and rode back to Millhaven in the dark. The stars overhead were thick and cold, indifferent to the small dramas of human cruelty and courage playing out beneath them. When he reached the stable and unsaddled his horse, he lay down in the hay and listened. Through the wall, he could hear Clara not crying this time, talking, to herself or to God or to Daniel. He couldn't tell. 4 more days, she was saying, her voice barely a thread in the dark. I just have to get through 4 more days. And then Saturday again. I can do it. I can take it. I've taken worse. She was counting the days until her next beating, the way a prisoner marks the wall, not with dread, but with the grim arithmetic of survival. She had accepted it. She had built her entire existence around absorbing punishment and staying alive long enough to absorb the next. Ethan pressed his forehead against the rough wall between them. He closed his eyes. 2 days, he whispered. Hold on 2 more days. Wednesday was the longest day of Ethan Cole's life. He forced himself to stay invisible, sitting in the saloon nursing beers, watching Rourke's routine. The man was predictable in his cruelty. Every 2 hours he found a reason to summon Clara. Every summons ended with a correction, a slap for a crooked tablecloth, a shove for being too slow with coffee, a kick under the table that nobody saw but everybody heard. Clara absorbed it all. She had passed beyond flinching into something worse. She moved through the saloon like a ghost, anticipating every command, reading Rourke's moods the way a sailor reads weather. At noon, Ethan saw something that made his blood go cold. Clara was carrying a tray of glasses from the kitchen. Rourke was talking to a group of miners. As she passed behind him, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. He pulled her close and said something in her ear that Ethan couldn't hear. Clara's face went white, dead white. She nodded once and pulled away. Her hand was shaking so badly that the glasses rattled on the tray. Ethan gripped the edge of the bar until the wood bit into his palms. Ned leaned over from behind the bar. Don't. Don't what? Whatever you're thinking, don't. Last man who tried to help her is buried in the desert without a marker. Ned's voice was hollow, the voice of a man who had made peace with his own cowardice. I've got a wife and 2 kids. This town can't afford heroes. Ethan looked at him. What can this town afford? Ned looked back with empty eyes. Survival. Ethan left the saloon. He found Rosa in her shop fitting a dress on a young Mexican girl who couldn't have been more than 16. Rosa sent the girl to the back room with a gentle pat and turned to Ethan. You have the combination, she said. It was not a question. How did you know? Because Aldous rode past my shop this morning, and for the first time in 3 years, he looked me in the eye. She sat down. Thursday. But I need Clara to open the office. Rourke locks it when he leaves. She has a key. He makes her clean the office every Thursday while he's gone. He counts the whiskey bottles when he gets back to make sure she hasn't stolen any. Rosa's lip curled. Will she help? She's terrified. I know she's terrified. Will she help? Ethan thought about what Cutter had told him. About the letter Daniel had left. About the look on Clara's face when she'd recited the debt numbers in the saloon, steady, precise, the voice of a woman who had been paying attention even when everyone assumed she wasn't. There's something you should know about Clara, Rosa said, answering her own question before he could. That girl can add numbers in her head faster than a telegraph operator sends code. Her father taught her. She's been cleaning that office every Thursday for 8 months. Rosa leaned forward. You think she hasn't looked at that ledger? You think she hasn't seen the numbers? She knows, Ethan said. She's known for months. She hasn't done anything about it because knowing and proving are 2 different things. And because the last time she challenged Rourke's numbers, he locked her in that storeroom for 2 days without water. Rosa paused. But if you give her a real chance, that girl won't just help you. She'll burn him to the ground. The evening light shifted. Somewhere outside the town of Millhaven was settling into its nightly routine of silence and fear and pretending. I need to talk to her alone, Ethan said. Tomorrow morning, 5 o'clock, before Rourke comes down. Rosa nodded. I'll leave my back door open. That night, Ethan sat at his usual spot at the bar and watched Wednesday fold itself into the darkness. Rourke drank 7 whiskeys by sundown, 8 by the time the poker game started. By 10, the man was swaying in his chair, eyes glassy, voice thick. Clara, he bellowed across the empty room. Close up the tables and bring me 1 more. Clara came out from the kitchen. She looked at the glass in Rourke's hand, at his swaying, at the ugly brightness in his eyes that whiskey produced when it burned through whatever thin restraint he had left. "You've had enough, Mr. Rourke." The room went absolutely still. Rourke's eyes focused the drunk haze burning away like fog in sunlight. He set down his glass with great care. He stood up slowly. "What did you say?" Clara's hands were shaking, but she didn't take it back. "I said you've had enough." Rourke walked toward her, each step deliberate. The minors scattered from his path. He stopped an inch from her face. "Pour the drink, Clara." She poured it. Her hands shook and whiskey splashed on the table. "Clean that up." She cleaned it with her bare hand, wiping the whiskey off the table and drying it on her dress. Rourke watched her with a satisfaction that made Ethan's stomach turn. "Now say you're sorry." "I'm sorry, Mr. Rourke." "Louder, so everyone can hear." "I'm sorry, Mr. Rourke." He patted her head like a dog. "Good girl. Storeroom. Now." He pulled the key from his pocket, walked to the storeroom door, and held it open. Clara walked in. Rourke closed the door, locked it, pocketed the key. He turned to the room and spread his arms wide. "Gentlemen, another round on the house." The miners cheered. From behind the locked door in the dark, Clara Voss sat and counted the hours until 5. Across the room, Ethan Cole set his untouched beer on the bar and walked out into the night. He stood on the boardwalk and breathed. Tomorrow he would open a safe and find a ledger. He would find whatever else Rourke kept in that iron box, the letter if it was there, and the truth that Daniel Voss had tried to leave behind for the woman he loved. And if the numbers said what he believed they said, Silas Rourke's empire of cruelty was about to meet the one weapon it had never prepared a defense against. A woman who had been counting in the dark.
What?
But as Ethan walked back toward the stable, he didn't see the shadow in the gap between two buildings. Deputy Frank Aldous stood there, face gray hands, fists at his sides. He was watching Ethan walk, and behind him, further back in the darkness, where the lamplight from the saloon didn't reach, stood Rourke's foreman, a thick man named Dex Morrow, who had been watching Aldous watch Ethan. Morrow's face showed nothing. He turned on his heel and walked toward the amber rail to deliver his report. "I kept every number in my head while you kicked me." A woman's silent war against the man who owned her town. Part 2, The Numbers in the Dark. Chapter 3. Thursday came with a smell of dust and a stillness that pressed against the skin like a warning. Ethan was awake at 4:30, sitting in the dark of the livery stable with his boots already laced and his revolver checked twice. At 10 minutes to 5, he heard Rourke's heavy footsteps above the saloon, the creak of floorboards, the rattle of a key, and a lock. The storeroom door opened and closed. Rourke's boots went back up the stairs. Ethan counted to 60. Then he moved. He slipped through the alley between the stable and the saloon, hugging the wall. The back door of the amber rail was warped and didn't sit flush in the frame. A thin line of lamplight showed through the gap. He pushed it open an inch. Clara was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the floor nearest the bar. She heard the door and spun around, eyes wide, one fist clenched around the scrub brush like a weapon. "It's me," Ethan whispered. "Are you out of your mind? Rosa's back door is open. Come with me. 20 minutes. If he comes down, he won't come down before 7. You know his routine better than anyone." Clara stared at him. The scrub brush trembled in her hand. Then she set it down carefully, wiped her hands on her apron, and followed him into the alley. They moved fast, cutting through the gap between buildings until they reached the back of Rosa's shop. The door was open. Rosa was waiting inside with coffee and a single candle burning low. Clara stopped in the doorway when she saw Rosa. Something passed between the two women. Not words. Something older. Recognition. The look of people who had survived the same storm from different boats. "Sit down, mija," Rosa said. "I can't stay long." "Sit." Clara sat. Rosa pushed the coffee toward her. Ethan stood by the window watching the street. "He knows," Ethan said without preamble. "Or he suspects. You know the ledger is wrong. You've known for months. Tell me what you've seen." Clara's hands wrapped around the coffee cup. She didn't drink. "I know what I've seen. Tell me." Her voice went steady, mechanical, the voice of a woman reciting numbers she had turned over in her mind 1,000 times. "Daniel borrowed $200. That's what the original note said. I saw it. I watched him sign it. 2% monthly interest, that's $224 total." She paused. "After Daniel died, Rourke showed me the ledger. It said 412. He told me Daniel had come back twice for additional loans. But Daniel never went back. I know he never went back because he was in bed with the fever for 3 weeks before he died. He couldn't walk to the outhouse, let alone the saloon." "Why didn't you say something?" Clara laughed. "It was a terrible sound. I did, the first week. I told Rourke the numbers were wrong, that Daniel only borrowed 200. You know what he did? He grabbed me by the hair, dragged me to the storeroom, locked the door, and didn't open it for 2 days. No food, no water. She swallowed. When he let me out, he said if I ever questioned his books again, he'd add another 100 to the balance. And he has, Rosa said quietly, every month. Every month, Clara confirmed. I clean his office every Thursday. I see the ledger open on his desk. My balance goes up, never down. Last month it was 370. This month it'll be 390, maybe 400. By Christmas, 500. By next year, 1,000. It doesn't matter what I do, the number just grows. Ethan pulled a chair out and sat across from her. What if I told you I could open that safe? Clara went still. I have the combination, and I have proof that 17 families in this town have been cheated the same way. If we can get that ledger out, compare it to the records Rosa has been collecting for 2 years, and take the whole package to a federal judge. There is no judge who isn't in Rourke's pocket. There's a federal judge in Prescott. His name is Emery Whitfield. I don't know him personally, but I've heard his name from men in the marshal's office, men who said he's honest. Clara looked at Rosa. Rosa's expression was careful, not dismissive, but not sold. Today, Ethan said, Rourke rides out to the Garrett Ranch this afternoon. You'll be cleaning his office. I come in through the back. We open the safe, copy the key pages, and put everything back before he returns. He'll never know. And if he does know, then we deal with it. That's not a plan. That's a prayer. Sometimes prayers are all you've got. Clara was quiet. She stood and walked to the window, standing next to Ethan, looking out at the empty street. The first pink light of dawn was creeping over the rooftops. Somewhere a rooster crowed. The town was waking up, another day of dust and fear and silence. My father told me something, Clara said. She was looking at the street, not at Ethan. He said numbers don't lie, people lie, systems lie, but numbers, if you follow them far enough, will always tell you the truth. She turned. I don't need to copy the pages. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? I mean, I've been looking at that ledger every Thursday for 8 months. I know every number in it, every name, every balance, every date. She tapped her temple. I have it in my head, all of it. Ethan stared at her. Rosa smiled slowly, the way a flame catches on dry wood. I told you, Rosa said quietly. Give her a chance and she'll burn him to the ground. I don't need a chance, Clara said. And her voice had changed. The tremor was gone, replaced by something that had been gathering in the dark for a very long time. I need a pencil, paper, and 1 hour. I can reproduce every page of that ledger from memory, every inflated number, every phantom debt, every dollar he's stolen. She looked at Ethan. And then I need you to get me out of this town alive. The room was very still. Ethan felt something shift, not in the air, but in his understanding of what he was doing here. He had come into this planning to save Clara Voss. He was realizing now with a clarity that felt like cold water that Clara Voss did not need saving. She needed a door. And he was the door. Can you do it now, he asked. Right here. Not all of it. But I can start with the key accounts, the ones where the fraud is biggest. Rosa handed her a pencil and a stack of brown wrapping paper. Clara sat down and she began to write. Her hand moved fast, numbers flowing from the pencil in neat, precise columns. Names, dates, amounts, borrowed amounts, recorded in the ledger, the difference. She didn't pause. She didn't hesitate. She wrote the way a river moves, steady and unstoppable. Ethan watched over her shoulder. Robert Shaw, $200 borrowed ledger shows $412. Miguel Esperanza, $150, Iowa ledger shows $350. Widow Garner, debt paid in full ledger, shows $160 remaining. Holt family, $80 borrowed ledger, shows $240. Davis Ranch, $300 borrowed ledger, shows $680. He's stolen over $4,000 from this town, Ethan said. Closer to 5, Clara said without looking up. And that's just the accounts I've memorized. There are other pages I haven't been able to study long enough. The safe would give us everything. Then we get the safe too. Both my memory and the physical ledger one confirms the other. Even Rourke's lawyers can't argue with that. She kept writing. Ethan looked at the neat rows of numbers, the arithmetic of 8 months of suffering, reduced to ink on brown paper, and felt a cold, clean anger settle over him like a coat. Then the back door rattled. All 3 of them went rigid. Rosa moved to the door, scissors in her hand. She cracked it open. Old Cutter. He was out of breath, his one good eye wild. The cowboy in here. Ethan stepped forward. What is it? Rourke ain't out riding to Garris's today. Cutter grabbed Ethan's arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. His foreman, Dex Morrow, came by the stable an hour ago. Told me Rourke canceled the ride. Said he's got business in town today. Special business. He looked at Ethan hard. And I seen Morrow talking to Rourke last night, late after the saloon closed. Morrow was watching Aldous, and Aldous was watching you. The room went silent. He knows, Rosa whispered. Ethan's mind moved fast. Rourke knew someone was asking questions. He didn't know what exactly, but he knew enough to change his plans. That meant the safe was off limits. That meant Rourke would watch Clara like a hawk. That meant the plan they'd spent 2 days building had just crumbled. Clara, you need to go back now before he notices you're gone. Clara grabbed the papers she'd been writing. I'm not leaving these here. He won't search my shop, Rosa said firmly. No. Clara folded the papers quickly and shoved them inside her dress, flat against her stomach, tucked into the waistband of her skirt. They stay with me. Nobody searches me. Her mouth twisted. He never touches me with his hands, just his boots. She moved toward the back door, then stopped. She looked at Ethan. Thursday's gone, she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, the voice of a woman recounting weather. Saturday is in 2 days. You know what happens on Saturdays. I know. Last Saturday, he dislocated my shoulder. The Saturday before that, he cracked a rib. She paused. He's getting worse every week. If you don't get me out before Saturday night, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. You might not have anyone left to save. She slipped out the back door and disappeared into the alley. The three of them stood in Rosa's shop in the morning quiet. Outside, the town of Millhaven was waking up smoke from cooking fires. The clang of the smithy down the street, the slow groan of the saloon door being propped open. Ethan looked at Cutter. Where's Morrow now? In the saloon, eating breakfast like nothing happened. But he's got his gun on his hip. He never wears his gun at breakfast. How many men does Rourke have? Morrow's the muscle. There's 2 others men named Cord and Priest. They do Rourke's dirty work when things need doing in the dark. They're the ones who beat Rosa's husband. They're the ones who burned Davis's barn. So Rourke, Morrow, Cord, Priest. 4, 5 if you count Aldous. I'm not counting Aldous, Ethan said. You sure? Because Rourke is. And if Rourke finds out Aldous gave you that combination, he won't, because we're not using it. New plan. He walked to the window and looked out at the street. The amber rail sat across from him in the early light, its sign creaking in the morning wind. Through the window, he could see Clara behind the bar, already working her movements precise, controlled, as though nothing in the world was different, as though she wasn't carrying the truth against her skin. He watched her for a long moment. What's in that safe, he said, besides the ledger? Rosa looked at him. Daniel's letter, he said. Rourke took it. It's in the safe along with everything else he's keeping for insurance. Rosa was quiet. If that letter says what I think it says, Ethan continued, it's not just fraud. It's evidence of something else entirely. He turned from the window. We're not breaking into the safe on Thursday, he said. Rourke stays close. We stay closer. We wait. And when he makes his move, he looked at Cutter. We make ours. Chapter 4. The day that followed was the most careful day Ethan Cole had ever lived. He went back to the amber rail. He took his seat. He drank his beer slowly and he watched. Rourke was different today. Quieter. He sat at his table with a glass he didn't empty, and his eyes moved over the room with a new kind of attention. Not the careless surveillance of a man who owned everything, but the sharpened watchfulness of a man who was beginning to feel that something had gotten away from him. Clara worked. She moved through the saloon with the same ghost-like precision, wiping tables, refilling glasses, disappearing into the kitchen, coming back out. But twice Ethan caught her eyes moving toward him. Not long, just a flicker, and in that flicker, something steady. At noon, there was a moment that Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. Clara was wiping down the bar, working her way toward where Ethan sat. Rourke was occupied with a dispute between 2 miners at the back table. Morrow stood by the front door with his arms crossed and his gun on his hip, watching the room. Clara reached Ethan's end of the bar. She kept wiping. She didn't look at him. The heat pressed down on the saloon. Outside, the street was empty. Nobody moved in Millhaven between noon and 2, when the Arizona sun turned the dust to white, and the smart thing was to find shade and stay in it. The clock behind the bar ticked. A fly circled the whiskey bottles. A horse shifted its weight somewhere outside, and the hitching post creaked. Ethan reached into his coat pocket. He set something on the bar in front of her quietly, without ceremony, without looking at her. A piece of cornbread, wrapped in a cloth, still warm from where Rosa had pressed it into his hands that morning, when he had stopped by her shop on his way to the saloon. Clara's wiping cloth stopped. She looked at the cornbread. She looked at his hand already withdrawn, resting flat on the bar as though nothing had happened. She looked at his profile, the side of his face, the line of his jaw, the way he was watching the middle distance, as if he had already forgotten what he'd done. The clock measured out 4 slow ticks. 4 ticks in which Clara stood at the bar with a cloth in her hands and a piece of cornbread 6 inches from her fingers, and the entire weight of 8 months pressed down on those 6 inches. 8 months of learning not to accept kindness because kindness had a price. Of learning not to hope because hope left you exposed. Of learning to be small and still and invisible so that the thing that hunted for anything worth taking would pass over her. 4 ticks, the clock, the flies, the creak of the hitching post. Then Clara's hand moved. She picked up the cornbread. She put it in the pocket of her apron. She kept wiping. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them looked at the other. The saloon went on making its noise cards and Boots and a miner arguing about something that didn't matter. But something had been said in the language that people use when words would cost too much. That evening, Rourke called Clara to his table. Ethan watched from the bar, his beer untouched, every muscle in his body still. Rourke didn't kick her, didn't shout. He simply spoke to her in a low, even voice, the same voice he used to discuss the weather, and Clara stood beside his table and listened and nodded and said, "Yes, Mr. Rourke." And when she came back behind the bar, her hands were shaking so badly that she had to set down the glasses she was carrying. She didn't look at Ethan. He didn't look at her. But he heard her breathing fast, shallow, the breathing of someone who has just been told something terrible, in a voice that made the terror feel like routine. Whatever Rourke had said, the schedule had changed. Ethan left the saloon as the evening crowd was coming in. He walked to the back of the livery stable into the far stall where old Cutter kept his private territory, a cot, a lantern, a dented tin cup. He sat on a crate and waited. 20 minutes later, Cutter appeared in the stall doorway. "You heard?" Ethan asked. "Ned told me. Rourke spoke tomorrow after supper. He's moving his plans up." Cutter lowered himself onto the cot with the care of a man whose bones had opinions. He was going to wait for Saturday. Standard operation after the poker game, when he's got the excuse of drink and the witnesses have gone home. Cutter's voice was flat. "But you showing up changed the math. Rourke doesn't like uncertain variables. He's decided to move tomorrow night instead of Saturday." "Tomorrow?" "Friday, after the saloon closes. Morrow's got a wagon in the alley." Ethan sat with this for a moment. The lantern threw a steady orange light against the stall wall. "The mine shaft on the ridge," Cutter said. "That's where Court and Priest are meeting them. It's where the preacher was supposed to go until Hollis decided not to do it." He looked at Ethan with his one good eye. The preacher was Lucky's son. Clara won't be. Ethan stood up. "I need Aldous," he said, "tonight." "Aldous was fired this morning. Rourke gave him until sundown to leave town." "Is he gone?" Cutter shook his head. "His horse is still in my stable." "Yeah." He found Aldous in the back room of the hardware store, sitting in the dark, with his hat in his hands and his badge, the bent, ruined badge, on the floor beside him. He looked up when Ethan came in, and there was something in his face that hadn't been there before. Something that had gotten through the shame and taken root. "Rourke know about the combination?" Ethan asked. "I don't know. Morrow may have guessed, may have told him I was talking to you, but even if he did, he can't prove it." Aldous looked at the badge on the floor. "He fired me this morning. Said if I was still in town by sundown, Morrow would make sure I left in a box." "Are you leaving?" A long pause. "No." Aldous said it quietly, but he said it without hesitation. He looked up at Ethan. "I heard her every night," he said, "through the wall of the building. 3 years of hearing her in that storeroom and looking at my boots every morning and telling myself it wasn't my place." His voice cracked on the last word. "I looked in the mirror this morning. First time in a year I really looked, and I didn't recognize the man looking back." He reached down and picked up the bent badge. He turned it in his hands. Then he straightened up. He set the badge in the band of his hat. Useless, bent, out of shape, but present. "What do we need?" he asked. Ethan told him. He went to Rosa next. She was still awake, the lamp in her shop burning low over a length of blue cotton. She was hemming her needle, moving in and out with the automatic precision of someone doing work. Their hands know well enough to leave the mind free. She looked up when Ethan came in. "Tomorrow night," he said. Rosa set down the fabric. He told her what Cutter had told him. She listened without interrupting, her hands folded on the table. When he finished, the lamp flame wavered in a draft from the window and settled. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "A signal. And Henry." He looked at the rifle on the wall, the one that had been hanging there since the day her husband had left for Tucson, the one she told Ethan Miguel had taught her to use before he went. And anyone in this town who owes Rourke a debt and is tired of it. Rosa looked at the rifle, then she looked at Ethan. "I'll be ready," she said. He started for the door. Rosa spoke to his back. "There's something else, about the safe." She stood. "I wasn't going to say this because I didn't want to give you false hope. But there's a man, a freighter, who came through here 4 months ago, stopped for the night. He'd done work at Rourke's place a few years back. Some kind of repair job." She paused. "He told me after a few drinks that Rourke kept more than just the ledger in that safe. He said Rourke called it his insurance papers and personal effects from people who owed him. Things he could use. Letters, signed documents, personal things." Ethan turned around. "He took everything from the storeroom," Rosa said, "after Daniel died, before Clara could go back in. He went through Daniel's things himself." She looked at Ethan steadily. "If that letter is anywhere, it's in that safe." Ethan said nothing for a moment. "After tomorrow night," he said, "we'll know." He walked out into the dark. "Here." The night sky over Millhaven was enormous stars packed so densely above the desert that the darkness between them felt incidental and afterthought. Ethan walked back to the stable, slowly letting the cool air work on the heat of the day, still radiating from the packed earth. He stopped at the wall between the stable and the storeroom. He pressed his palm flat against the rough timber. He stood there for a minute or 2 or 10, he couldn't tell. Through the wood, nothing. Silence. Clara was asleep, or as close to it as she could get. He thought about what she had said in Rosa's shop in the pink pre-dawn light, with a pencil moving across brown paper and the numbers coming out of her like water. He thought about her father, a schoolteacher in Missouri, who had given his daughter the only weapon that had ever really mattered. Not a gun, not money, numbers. The ability to look at the world as it actually was, rather than as powerful men said it was. He thought about Daniel Voss dying in a locked room 8 months ago. About a letter meant for the woman he loved still sealed in an iron box behind a bar. And he thought about the 5 years he had spent trying to outride the thing he was. Tomorrow night, he decided it was the last night he ran. Nah. Chapter 5. Friday came in slowly, the way bad days do, as if time itself was reluctant to hand it over. Ethan spent the morning at the bar. He ate breakfast eggs and dry bread and watched the room. Rourke was in early, which was unusual. He sat at his head table with Morrow and spoke in low, deliberate tones, and his eyes moved over the saloon with the proprietary satisfaction of a man reviewing what he owns before someone else tries to take it. Clara worked. She was everywhere Rourke needed her to be. Coffee, food, cleaning, hauling, carrying, and she never stopped, and she never made a sound. And if she was afraid, she had taken the fear somewhere deep inside herself where it could not be used against her. At 3 in the afternoon, Ethan slipped away. He spent an hour with Aldous behind the hardware store. He spent another with Cutter in the stable. By the time the supper crowd began drifting into the amber rail, the pieces were in place. At 5 o'clock, a boy appeared at Ethan's elbow, 12 years old, barefoot, dark-eyed, moving through the room like he was invisible. He pressed a folded note into Ethan's hand and was gone before Ethan could blink. He unfolded it under the bar. "Rosa's handwriting cramped and precise. Ned came to me. He wants to help. I also have 6 families. They're ready. Widow Garner, too. They're scared, but they're ready. I've got the Henry. Old Cutter's got the shotguns. We'll come when we hear the first shot." Ethan folded the note. He put it in his breast pocket over his heart. He ordered another beer. He waited. The evening moved like a slow river. Rourke drank deliberately, steadily, without his usual performance. Morrow stayed close. The poker game started at 8, and the saloon filled up with men who owed Rourke money and who looked at Clara whenever Rourke wasn't watching with the helpless, compressed guilt of people who knew what was happening and had decided that knowing was enough. At 10:30, the game wound down. Men settled up, drifted out. The saloon went quiet. Ethan sat at the bar and watched the clock. Clara was in the kitchen. He could hear her, the sound of dishes in a tin basin, the soft movement of her feet on the floor. She was humming something, a song he didn't recognize, slow and low, the kind of song you sing when you need to hear a human voice and there's no one else around. At 11:15, Rourke stood up. He straightened his vest. He walked toward the kitchen. "Clara!" The humming stopped. "Yes, Mr. Rourke?" "Put the dishes down. We're taking a ride." A pause. "A ride? It's almost midnight. I need to check something at the mine. You're coming with me." I'd rather stay, Mr. Rourke." That wasn't a question. Ethan set down his glass. He moved toward the side door, staying out of Rourke's line of sight. In the kitchen, he heard Rourke pull the storeroom key from his pocket and drop it on the counter. Get your shawl, it gets cold on the ridge. Silence. Then Clara's voice quiet and shaking and final. No. The word rang through the empty saloon like a bell struck once and left to carry. Morrow's hand moved toward his gun. What did you say? Rourke asked. I said no. Clara's voice was trembling now, but she didn't pull it back. I'm not going to the mine. Not tonight. Not ever. Rourke's voice changed. The calm evaporated like water on a hot stone. You don't say no to me. He grabbed her arm. She screamed. Her feet slid on the wet kitchen floor. A dish shattered. You don't have that right. You are nothing. You own nothing. You owe me everything. She fought him. For the first time in 8 months, she fought with everything she had, clawing at his hands, kicking, throwing her weight against his grip. Rourke cursed. He backhanded her across the face. She tasted blood. The world went white. The front door of the amber rail exploded inward. Ethan Cole stood in the doorway, his revolver drawn, his face carved from stone. Behind him, Aldous came through the side door with a shotgun that belonged to old Cutter's collection. Let her go, Ethan said. The voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Rourke released Clara's arm. She stumbled backward and caught herself on the kitchen counter. Blood ran from her lip. Her chest heaved. Morrow, Rourke said. Morrow drew his pistol and spun toward Ethan. Ethan didn't hesitate. His revolver barked once. The shot caught Morrow's gun hand. The pistol clattered to the floor. Morrow howled, clutching his wrist, blood pouring between his fingers. Next one center, Ethan said. The back door burst open. Cord and Priest rushed in, guns drawn, boots loud on the wooden floor. Aldous swung the shotgun toward them. Drop them. His voice cracked on the words, but his hands were steady. Both of you, now. Cord hesitated. Priest looked at Rourke. Rourke's eyes were welled, calculating, searching, hunting for the angle he always found. You think you can walk into my town and take what's mine? He hissed at Ethan. She was never yours. She signed a contract. She signed a contract for $200 that you inflated to $400. Then you added phantom charges every month until the number became unpayable. You've done it to 17 families in this town, every one of them documented, every one of them provable. Rourke's face went gray. You don't have proof. You don't have anything. Clara stepped forward. Blood was still running from her lip. Her hands shook, but her eyes were blazing steady and clear as a rifle sight. She reached into her dress and pulled out the folded papers. She held them up. I have your entire ledger, Mr. Rourke. Her voice rose, carrying through the empty saloon. Every page, every name, every number. Written from memory because I've been reading it every Thursday for 8 months, while you thought I was too stupid to understand what I was looking at. Rourke stared at the papers, his mouth opened. No sound came out. Every debt you've inflated, every payment you've erased, every family you've trapped. She took a step toward him. Robert Shaw's debt, the Mendez family's debt, Widow Garner's debt, all of it. I know the real numbers, and I know your numbers, and they don't match Mr. Rourke. Not even close. That's your word against mine, Rourke snarled, recovering. A serving girl with a grudge against her employer. No judge will. The front door opened. Rosa Mendez walked in, the Henry rifle across her arm. Behind her came Ned, the bartender. His apron still on his face, pale but set. Behind Ned came old Cutter, moving slowly but moving. Behind Cutter, Widow Garner, clutching her shawl with both hands. A miner's wife, Mrs. Holt, her jaw tight. 2 men Ethan didn't know miners from the look of their hands, and 3 more behind them. 6, 10, 15 people filing into the amber rail, filling the room, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of Rourke's own tables. They were afraid. Ethan could see it in every face, but they were there. Rosa set the oilcloth bundle on Rourke's own table and unwrapped it. She spread the papers across the wood, receipts, notes, tallies, records in different hands and different inks. My word, Rosa said. And theirs. She gestured at the room. And hers. She pointed at Clara. And his. She pointed at Aldous. Your own deputy, Mr. Rourke, ready to testify. Rourke looked around the room. His empire stood before him. And for the first time, it was looking back. He reached for the derringer in his vest. I wouldn't, Ethan said. The revolver was aimed at Rourke's chest, steady, patient. You reach into that pocket and I'll put you down where you stand. Rourke's hand trembled above his vest. His face contorted, years of power and cruelty, and unchallenged authority crumbling behind his eyes like a dam that had been weakening for a long time and had finally found the pressure it couldn't hold. You can't do this, he whispered. I built this town. You bled this town, Clara said. She walked forward until she was standing directly in front of him. The same distance she had stood 100 times before, looking up at his fist or his boot or his open hand. But this time she wasn't flinching. "And I'm not your property anymore." She reached into his vest pocket herself. She pulled out the derringer. She pulled out the storeroom key. She placed the derringer on the table. She held the key in her palm and looked at it just for a moment with an expression that Ethan would not forget, and then she dropped it on the floor. It made a small sound when it hit the boards. Not loud, just final. "Aldous," Ethan said, "lock him in the storeroom." Aldous stepped forward. He and Rourke locked eyes. 3 years of "yes, sir," and "right away, sir," and looking at his boots while a woman was kicked across the floor. 3 years compressed into a single look. "Let's go, Mr. Rourke," Aldous said quietly. "You're dead, Aldous. You hear me? You're all dead. Move." Rourke walked to the storeroom. He stepped inside. Aldous closed the door. He turned the lock. The click echoed through the saloon like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Ta. Clara stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by the people of Millhaven, her lips still bleeding, her hands still holding the papers that would tear Silas Rourke's world apart. She was shaking, not from fear, from the aftershock of something she had carried inside her for 8 months finally breaking free. Ethan holstered his revolver. He looked at her across the room. She looked back. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying. Then Clara's knees buckled. Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides and caught her before she hit the floor. She grabbed fistfuls of his shirt and pressed her forehead against his chest. She did not cry. She was past crying. She just held on. "It's over," Ethan said. Clara shook her head against his chest. "It's not over. He has friends. That judge in Prescott, people in Tucson. He won't stop." "Then we don't stop either." Outside, the sound of hooves. Distant at first, then closer. A lot of hooves. Tom's head snapped toward the window. Aldous moved to the door and looked out. "Riders," Aldous said. His voice had gone tight. "Coming from the North Road, 8, maybe 10. Carrying torches." "Rourke's reinforcements," Ethan said. "He must have sent word before tonight. Insurance." Aldous turned back to the room, his face ashen. "They're carrying torches." From behind the storeroom door, Rourke's voice slithered through the wood, muffled but unmistakable. "That's the sound of men who owe me favors, Cassidy. You wanted a fight, you've got one." Ethan looked at Clara. She was standing on her own now, blood on her chin, papers clutched to her chest, fire in her eyes that no boot in the world could stamp out. "How do you want to play this?" she asked him. Ethan picked up Morrow's dropped pistol and handed it to Aldous. He checked his own revolver. He looked at the people of Millhaven, scared, exhausted, but standing. "Together," he said. The hooves got louder. Ned, the bartender, the man who had spent 3 years telling himself he couldn't afford to be a hero, came back. He had gone out the back and returned with a rifle from his own home, and his face was different now. They positioned themselves. Aldous at the side window, Rosa with her, Henry at the back hallway, the 2 miners by the kitchen door, Old Cutter moving the women toward the root cellar hatch, Widow Garner, Mrs. Holt, 2 others. Clara didn't move. "Everyone who can't fight," Ethan said. "I heard what you said." She had the derringer from the table. She checked it, broke the barrel, 2 rounds, snapped it shut. The way a woman checks a gun she has handled before. "I'm not hiding in a cellar while someone else decides my future," she said. "Not ever again." Ethan looked at her. He wanted to argue. He saw her split lip, her thin wrist, the bruise forming on her arm where Rourke had grabbed her. He also saw the way she held the derringer steady, certain the grip of a woman who had made her decision. "Stay behind the bar," he said. "Don't fire unless someone comes over the top. I know how a gun works." "I know you do." The torches were visible now through the front window, bobbing orange dots moving down the North Road like a line of angry fireflies. From behind the storeroom door, Rourke's voice came through again. "Those are men from the Rocking Bee Ranch, hard men who've killed rustlers and anyone else who got in their way. You think your little band of shopkeepers is going to stop them?" Clara stood behind the bar. She looked at the storeroom door for one moment, one single second. Ethan saw the old Clara flicker across her face, the girl who flinched, the girl who had said yes, Mr. Rourke, for 8 months. Then it was gone. "You're going to have to do better than that, Mr. Rourke. You've been lying to me for 8 months. I don't believe a word that comes out of your mouth." Rourke slammed his fist against the door. "You stupid girl, you're going to die in here." "Maybe, but I'll die standing up." The riders reached the edge of town. A voice rough and commanding called out from the road. "Rourke, we got your message. Where are you?" From inside the storeroom, Rourke screamed, "In here, they've locked me and Cassidy and the girl. Kill them both." The front window shattered. Glass sprayed across the floor. A bullet buried itself in the wall 2 inches from Ethan's head. He dropped, flat-rolled, and came up firing his first shot aimed high, a warning. His second was not. A man outside grunted and fell from his horse. The other riders scattered, diving behind water troughs and hitching posts, dropping to the ground, their flames licking at the dry wooden boardwalk. "They're going to burn us out," Aldous shouted from the side window. "Not if we pin them down. Rosa, cover the back. Anyone comes through that door, shoot first." Rosa moved to the back hallway, rifle up, eyes cold. "I kept every number in my head while you kicked me. A woman's silent war against the man who owned her town. Part 3. What the numbers said. Chapter 6. The next 5 minutes were chaos. Bullets punched through the thin walls of the amber rail. Wood splintered. Bottles behind the bar exploded, sending whiskey and glass flying. The smell of gunpowder and burning wood mixed with the stench of spilled liquor, and the whole saloon seemed to shudder with every hit. Clara ducked below the bar. Her arms went over her head. The derringer was clutched against her chest. Every explosion made her body jerk, but she didn't scream. She had spent 8 months learning not to scream. Ethan fired methodically, one-shot shift position, one-shot shift. He worked the math of it without thinking how many riders, how many rounds, how much cover, where the angles were. He dropped a second rider who was trying to circle around to the side. Aldous held the side window. His borrowed pistol cracked in the darkness. He was scared Ethan could see it in the way he moved, but his shots were going where he intended them to go. Then Ned shouted from the side door. 2 of them coming around the south side. I can't hold. A shotgun blast. A scream. Then another shotgun blast. Then silence from the side door. Ethan risked a glance. Ned was on the floor clutching his arm. Not his leg, not the torso. The arm blood soaking through his sleeve, but his eyes still clear. "How bad?" Ethan called. "I've had worse," Ned said through his teeth. He was almost certainly lying, but he was already pushing himself upright against the wall. The shotgun reloaded his mouth a hard line. From behind the bar, Clara saw it. She shoved the derringer into her waistband, grabbed a bar towel, and crawled across the floor on her belly, glass cutting her palms, whiskey soaking her dress until she reached Ned. She pressed the towel against his arm with both hands. "Hold still," she said. "Ma'am, there's bullets flying and—" "Hold still." Ned shut up and let her work. Outside, the gunfire was changing. Slowing, Ethan could hear shouting arguments, the sound of men who had ridden in expecting to scare a few shopkeepers and found something else entirely. Nobody said anything about getting shot. "This ain't worth it. Buckley ain't Rourke ain't paying me enough to die for." Hooves retreating fast. 3 riders broke south and galloped away. Then 2 more. The line was breaking. But one man wasn't done. Ethan could see him through the broken window, crouched behind a freight wagon parked across the street. Big man, gray hat, reloading a Winchester with the calm, practiced patience of someone who did not panic and did not run. "Who's that?" Ethan said. Aldous crawled to the window and looked. The color left his face. "Rance Hollis, foreman of the Rocking Bee. He's the one Rourke calls when he needs something permanent done." "How permanent?" "He's the one who was supposed to make the preacher disappear." Hollis finished loading. He stood up behind the wagon and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The first hit the doorframe. The second went through the wall and struck the iron stovepipe, sending it crashing to the floor. The third hit the kerosene lamp hanging from the ceiling. The lamp shattered. Burning oil rained down onto the wooden floor. Fire. It caught fast, the old dry timber of the saloon floor soaked in years of spilled whiskey and lamp oil going up like paper. Flames raced across the boards, feeding on everything they touched. Smoke boiled toward the ceiling. "Everybody out!" Ethan shouted. "Back door now." Aldous grabbed Ned under one arm. One of the miners took the other. They moved toward the kitchen. Old Cutter and the others were already through the cellar hatch. Clara moved. Clara was not moving toward the back door. She was moving toward the bar. "Clara." She vaulted over the bar, landing hard on the far side, coughing as the smoke hit her, and grabbed the papers. The brown wrapping paper covered in her neat, precise columns of numbers. She shoved them inside her dress and turned to run. The storeroom door exploded outward. The hinges had been old-rotted by years of neglect and the desert's patient assault on everything that dared to stand. Rourke had been working them from the inside. The door gave with a sound like a rifle shot. He burst through the doorway. His face was distorted by rage, by fear, by the firelight that had turned the saloon into something out of a fever dream. His white shirt was torn. He looked like a man who had decided that if he was going down, he was going to take something with him. He saw Clara. She was 10 feet away, trapped between the burning bar and the broken door. The papers were in her dress. The fire was at her back. He lunged. Clara raised the derringer and fired. The shot went wide, grazed Rourke's ear, and buried itself in the wall behind him. He didn't even flinch. He crashed into her, slamming her against the bar. Her head cracked against the wood. The derringer flew from her hand. The world went white and hot and airless. Rourke's hands closed around her throat. "You think you can destroy me?" He was barely recognizable. The careful, calm man who spoke about the weather had been burned away. What was left underneath was something stripped raw. "You're nothing. You were nothing when your husband dragged you into my saloon, and you're nothing now." Clara couldn't breathe. The edges of her vision were going dark. She could feel the heat of the fire on her legs, smell burning wood and burning whiskey. Her hands clawed at his wrists, but he was too strong, too heavy, too desperate, with the terrible energy of a man who had nothing left to lose. Her right hand found the bar, searching, blind, scrabbling across the wood, something solid, cylindrical, heavy. A bottle, unbroken. She didn't think. She swung. The bottle connected with the side of Rourke's head. Glass shattered. Whiskey sprayed. His grip loosened 1 second, just 1 second, and that was enough. Clara drove her knee into his stomach. He doubled over, gasping. She twisted free, grabbed the edge of the bar, and pulled herself over it. She landed hard on the other side, coughing, her throat on fire, her vision full of smoke and sparks. Then something fell. She heard it before she saw it. The sound of something hitting the floor as Rourke staggered. Something small, light, inconsequential against the roar of the fire. A piece of paper, folded, old. It slid across the burning floor and came to rest at Clara's feet, inches from the flames. She looked at it. The handwriting on the outside was Daniel's. Her name, in his handwriting. The letters uneven, the handwriting of a man who was sick and weak and running out of time, but needed her to find this. Needed her to know. For one terrible suspended moment, the fire and the gunfight and the smoke and everything that was happening receded to a great distance. Clara crouched down and picked up the letter. "Clara," Ethan was there, coming through the smoke, like something conjured, his hand closing around her arm. "We have to go now." She shoved the letter inside her dress next to the papers. Against her skin, against her heart. Rourke straightened up. Blood poured from the gash on his temple. He reached down and picked up the derringer Clara had dropped. His hands were shaking. He aimed it at Ethan's back. Cassidy. Ethan spun. He saw the gun. He shoved Clara sideways with one arm and drew his revolver with the other in a single motion. Two guns fired at the same time. Rourke's shot went high, the derringer's short barrel, and his bleeding, ringing head ruined his aim. The bullet punched through Ethan's hat brim and kept going. Ethan's shot didn't miss. Rourke staggered backward. He looked down at his chest, at the dark stains spreading across the white of his shirt like ink and water. He looked up at Ethan with an expression of pure, uncomprehending disbelief. "You shot me." "Yes, I did." Rourke's knees buckled. He sat down on the burning floor. The flames were all around him now, climbing the walls, eating the ceiling, turning the saloon into a furnace. He looked at Clara standing in the kitchen doorway with Ethan's hand on her arm. He looked at her eyes. "Should have sold you to the miners," he whispered. "Should have been done with it." "You couldn't sell what you never own," Clara said. "They left him there." Ethan pulled Clara through the kitchen, through the cellar hatch, and into the alley. The night air hit her lungs and she doubled over, coughing out smoke and heat and 8 months of held breath. Behind them, the amber rail was fully engulfed. Flames were roaring through the roof, sending a tower of orange sparks into the black sky above Millhaven. Hollis was gone. The remaining riders had scattered when the fire started. Nobody wanted to hang around for an arson charge on top of everything else. The people of Millhaven stood in the street watching the saloon burn. Rosa had her arm around Widow Garner. Old Cutter sat on a barrel, his one good eye reflecting the flames. Aldous had Ned propped against a hitching post, working on his arm, with strips torn from his own shirt. The miners stood in a loose group, not speaking, watching the fire with the complicated faces of people who had been afraid for a very long time and were just beginning to understand that the thing they were afraid of was burning down. Clara stood in the middle of the street. Her face was lit by the fire. Her throat was bruised purple where Rourke's fingers had dug in. Her hands were bleeding from the glass. Her dress was soaked through and stinking of smoke. She reached inside her dress and pulled out the papers. The brown wrapping paper singed at the edges, some of the numbers smudged with blood and sweat and smoke, but intact. Every page, every name, every lie. She held them up. The people of Millhaven looked at them. Something moved through the crowd, then not joy, not yet. Something rawer than joy, like the feeling just before a wound is cleaned. The sharp, necessary shock of people realizing they had been living in a cage whose door had been open for a long time, and they had not known. "It's all here," Clara said. Her voice was raw from smoke and bruised from Rourke's hands, but it carried. Every debt, every real number, every lie. She looked at the faces around her, scared, smoke-stained, bleeding free. "This is your proof. This is your freedom, and nobody is ever going to take it from you again." Widow Garner began to cry. Mrs. Holt put her hands over her face. Ned sat down on the boardwalk and stared at nothing. Ethan stood behind Clara. He did not touch her. He watched her standing in front of a burning building, holding the evidence that would free an entire town, and he understood something that shifted the ground beneath his feet. He hadn't saved her. He had opened a door. She had walked through it and set the world on fire. And Clara turned to him, the flames reflected in her eyes. Her face was a mess of blood and soot and grief and something else. Something that had no name yet. Something that was just beginning to grow in the space where 8 months of fear had been. "You got shot at," she said. "He missed. He ruined your hat." Ethan reached up and felt the hole in his brim. He looked at it. "I like that hat." Clara's mouth twitched. Just a fraction. The ghost of a smile fighting its way through the exhaustion and the pain and the weight of everything that had happened. "I'll buy you a new one." "With what money?" "With the money Rourke stole from me. I figure he owes me about $200. She paused. "That's a lot of hats." Ethan laughed. It came out rough and broken and surprised, like a sound his body had forgotten how to make. Clara laughed too, and then she was crying, and then she was doing both at the same time, laughing and crying in the middle of a burning street, while the only prison she'd ever known collapsed into ash behind her. Ethan stepped forward and put his arms around her. She pressed her face against his chest, her fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt. He could feel her heart beat fast and wild and alive. He held her the way you hold something precious that you almost lost. "What happens now?" Clara whispered against his chest. "Now we ride to Prescott. New judge or not, a federal court has to look at that evidence. With 17 families testifying and a dead man's saloon still smoking, even a difficult judge would have trouble looking the other way. And if he does, then we go higher. Territorial governor, newspapers. I'll ride to Washington if I have to." Clara pulled back and looked up at him. She saw the scar on his arm. She saw the lines around his eyes carved by 5 years of guilt and hard roads. She saw a man who had spent half a decade looking for something worth stopping for. "Don't say things you don't mean, Ethan." "I haven't said a thing I don't mean since I rode into this town." Chapter 7. They rode out of Millhaven at first light. 3 horses, 3 riders. Ethan in front, Clara in the middle, Aldous bringing up the rear with a borrowed rifle across his saddle. The road to Prescott was 60 miles of open desert and canyon country, 2 days' ride if the horses held and nobody followed. Rosa stood at the edge of town watching them go. She had made 10 copies of Clara's papers, hidden in 10 different locations, one under the floorboards of her shop, one behind a loose stone in the church wall, one in a tin box buried behind the smithy. Even if someone burned every building in Millhaven to the ground, the truth would survive. Clara rode in silence for the first hour. Her throat was swollen and purple where Rourke's fingers had been. Every swallow felt like broken glass, but she sat straight in the saddle, her eyes forward the papers, and Daniel's letter resting against her skin, beneath her dress, warm from her body, heat rising and falling with every breath. She had not opened the letter yet. She knew she would, but not yet. Not here in the open with the smoke of the saloon still visible on the horizon behind them. Not until she was somewhere safe enough to let herself feel what it was going to make her feel. Ethan slowed his horse until he rode beside her. "How's the throat?" "Hurts. You should drink more water." "I'll drink when we stop. We're not stopping for another 4 hours." "Then I'll drink in 4 hours." He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them blinked. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," Ethan said. "You haven't met enough women." From behind them, Aldous made a sound that might have been a cough. "If you two are done," he said, "there's dust on the horizon behind us, about 3 miles back." Ethan turned in his saddle. He squinted against the morning sun. Aldous was right, a thin column of dust rising from the road they just traveled, moving at a trot. "How many?" "Can't tell yet. 3 or 4. Could be riders heading to Garrett's ranch for work." "Could be." They pushed the horses to a canter. The desert opened around them, flat and merciless red rock and sage and heat, already building even at this hour. Clara's horse, the one old cutter had lent her a gray mare, the old man called the mare, kept pace without complaint, her hooves striking the hard-packed earth in a rhythm that felt after a while like a heartbeat. By mid-morning, the dust behind them had grown. Not 3 riders, 5, and gaining. "That's not ranch workers," Aldous said. His voice had gone tight. Ethan pulled his horse to a stop at the mouth of a narrow canyon. Red rock walls rising on either side the passage, barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast. He looked back at the dust. He looked at the canyon. He made a decision. "Clara, ride through the canyon, don't stop. On the other side there's a fork, take the left path. It leads to a trading post called Miller's Crossing. There's a telegraph office there. What are you going to do?" "Aldous and I are going to slow them down." Clara pulled her horse around. "No, Clara, no, we already had this conversation." Her voice shook, but it was steady underneath the shaking, steady all the way down. "I don't run while other people bleed for me. This isn't about bleeding. Those papers, everything you've memorized, if Hollis gets you, it's over. Every family goes back to owing money they don't owe. Everything burns for nothing." Clara's hands shook on the reins. She looked at Ethan. She looked at Aldous. She looked at the dust growing behind them. "You come back," she said. "You hear me, Ethan? You come back." "I'll come back. Swear it." He reached up and took off his ruined hat, the one with the bullet hole through the brim. He held it out to her. "On this hat, which you still owe me a replacement for." Clara took the hat. She pressed it against her chest over the papers, over the letter over her heart. She held it there for a moment with both hands. Then she kicked the mare and rode into the canyon without looking back. Ethan watched until the sound of hooves faded into the red rock walls. Then he turned his horse sideways across the canyon mouth and drew his revolver. "High ground," he said to Aldous. "That ledge on the left, about 20 feet up. I see it? Get up there, don't fire until I fire, and don't miss." Aldous dismounted, slung the rifle over his shoulder, and scrambled up the rock face. Ethan stayed mounted, positioned in the center of the canyon mouth, visible a target, a challenge. The riders appeared 10 minutes later. 5 men on lathered horses, pushing hard. Hollis was in front, his gray hat unmistakable, his Winchester across his pommel. Behind him rode 4 men Ethan didn't recognize. Hollis pulled up 50 yards away. He studied Ethan with the cold, appraising eyes of a man who had been calculating odds his whole life. "Cassidy." "Hollis? Just you." "Just me." A long pause. The desert wind moved between them. "Where's the woman?" "Gone, long gone. You won't catch her." Hollis spat tobacco juice into the dust. He looked at the canyon entrance, at the red rock walls, at the position Ethan had taken up. He was calculating. "I wasn't planning to catch her," he said. "Rourke's dead. I saw the fire. Whatever he owed her, whatever she owes him, that's done. I don't work for dead men." "Then why are you following us?" "Because Rourke owed me 6 months' wages. With him dead, his assets are up for grabs. Your people burned the safe along with the saloon. The way I figure it, somebody owes me compensation." Ethan kept his revolver level. "You're chasing us for money. I'm chasing you for what's fair. $300. That's what Rourke owed me. You pay it, I ride away. You don't, we have a problem." "You don't have a problem. You have a choice." Ethan's voice was even, unhurried. "You're the man who was supposed to make a preacher disappear. You're the man Rourke called when he needed dirty work. You think I'm going to pay you and trust you to ride away?" Something shifted in Hollis's face. "That preacher business," he said. "That was Rourke's doing. I drove the wagon. The man is alive. I dropped him in Yuma with enough money to buy a ticket east. I ain't a killer, Cassidy. I'm a working man who's done things he ain't proud of." He shifted in his saddle. "Rourke told me there were rioters, said his property was being destroyed. He didn't mention women being kicked or ledgers being cooked. I've done things wrong. But I've never raised a hand to a woman, and I've never cheated a man who owed me square." Ethan studied him. 5 against 2 were bad odds. But something in Hollis's voice was true, not honest exactly, but pragmatic in a way that pragmatic men sometimes were, when the math stopped adding up. "I'll make you a different deal," Ethan said. Hollis waited. "You ride to Prescott with us. You testify about everything Rourke ordered you to do. The preacher, the barn, the threats. You tell a federal judge everything you know. In exchange, you get immunity, and you get your back wages from Rourke's estate." One of Hollis's riders muttered something. Hollis didn't turn. "Shut up, Miller." He stared at Ethan for a long time. The desert wind moved between them. A hawk circled high overhead, riding the thermals with the effortless patience of something that had all day. Then Hollis said, "Boys, go home." One of the riders started to protest. Hollis cut him off without raising his voice. "I said go home. This ain't our fight anymore." He looked at Ethan. If you're lying about the immunity, I'm not. A beat. Then let's ride. The four hired guns turned their horses and headed south back into the dust cloud they'd come from. Hollis rode forward alone, his Winchester sheathed. From the ledge above, Aldous climbed down. His face was slack with something between relief and disbelief. Did that just happen? He said. Get on your horse, Ethan said. We've got a woman to catch up to. They rode hard through the canyon. On the other side, the trail forked exactly as Ethan had described. They took the left path and pushed the horses to a gallop. An hour later, they spotted the mayor tied to a post outside a low adobe building with a hand-lettered sign, Miller's Crossing General Goods and Telegraph. Ethan dismounted and pushed through the door. Clara was standing at the telegraph counter dictating to a bald man with wire spectacles and ink-stained fingers. She turned when she heard the door. You're alive, she said. I told you I would be. I didn't believe you. Her eyes moved to Hollis, who had followed Ethan inside. Her body went rigid. Her hand moved toward the derringer in her waistband. Easy, Ethan said. He's with us. He's going to testify. Clara looked at Hollis with the hard, unblinking gaze of a woman who had spent 8 months learning to read men. You burned Davis's barn, she said. I did. You drove the preacher out of town. I did. He's alive in Yuma. And now you want to help us. I want to get paid and stay out of prison. Helping you is how I get both. Clara stared at him a long moment. Add another name to the wire, she said to the telegraph operator. Rance Hollis willing to provide testimony in exchange for immunity. Send it to the federal marshal's office in Prescott. The operator's key began to click. The sound filled the small room like a mechanical heartbeat, sending the truth across 60 miles of copper wire to a place where it could do damage. Yeah. Clara stepped outside. Ethan followed. They stood together in the shade of the building while the horses drank from a long trough. The afternoon heat shimmered off the desert floor in waves that made the horizon seem to breathe. What did Hollis tell you? Clara asked. About the preacher. He dropped him in Yuma. He's alive. Clara closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. Reverend Doyle, she said quietly. He was the first person in Millhaven who was kind to me after Daniel died. He brought me food. He read me scripture. Told me God had a plan. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When he disappeared, I thought Rourke had killed him. I thought anyone who tried to help me ended up dead. He didn't. And they didn't. Ethan looked at her. Rosa's alive. Cutter's alive. Aldous. Ned. Barely alive is alive. Barely doesn't matter. The telegraph operator appeared in the doorway. Reply coming in from the marshal's office. They followed him inside. The key was clicking. The operator wrote down the message in quick practice strokes. When it stopped, he read aloud. Message from Deputy U.S. Marshal Howard Stokes Prescott. It's quote, received your wire. Judge Whitfield not connected to Rourke. That information was false. Rourke had an open file here for 2 years, but we lacked evidence. Your testimony and documentation requested urgently. Sending escort. Arrive Miller's Crossing tomorrow noon. Do not proceed alone. End quote. Ethan read the message twice. Buckley Rourke had lied about the judge. Of course he had. A man whose entire life was built on false numbers and false debts would naturally lie about having a judge in his pocket. It was his last weapon fear. The same fear he had used to keep Clara on her knees. The same fear he had used to keep an entire town silent. And it almost worked. He lied, Clara said softly, about everything, right up to the end. That's what men like Rourke do. They build a world out of lies and make everyone else live in it. Clara sat down on a barrel outside the trading post. She reached inside her dress. She pulled out Daniel's letter. She held it in both hands, looking at the outside at her name in his handwriting, at the crinkled paper worn smooth at the folds from 8 months of being carried inside a dead man's coat pocket. She looked at it for a long time without opening it. He knew, she said. What? The letter. She looked up. Her eyes were dry now, though barely. He knew Rourke was lying. He wrote it down. He wanted me to have it in case... She stopped. In case something happened. She looked back at the letter. He was dying, and he was afraid, and all he could think about was making sure I had what I needed to fight back. Ethan said nothing. There are moments that don't belong to anyone else. Clara opened the letter. She read it slowly. Her hands were still. Her face went through several things in the space of a minute. Grief recognition, a terrible tenderness, something fierce and bright that came through the grief like a beam of light through a crack. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully. She put it back inside her dress next to the papers, against her skin. He said, the numbers don't lie, Clara. Follow the numbers. They'll show you everything he took and everything he owes. You were always smarter than him. You were always smarter than all of them. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She pressed her hand flat against her chest where the letter was. He signed it, yours in every number, Daniel. The desert was very quiet. Ethan looked at this woman, thin and bruised and smoke-stained and scarred, sitting on a barrel in front of a trading post at the edge of nowhere with the truth pressed against her heart and her dead husband's voice in her ears. He was right, Ethan said. And the escort arrived the next day at noon. 4 U.S. Marshals in dark coats on fresh horses, led by a man named Howard Stokes. A square, deliberate man with a handshake like a bear trap and eyes that missed nothing. He read Clara's papers, standing in the shade of the trading post, turning each page with careful hands, his expression growing darker with every line. Ma'am, Stokes said when he finished, I've been chasing Rourke's shadow for 2 years. Couldn't get a single person in Millhaven to testify. Couldn't get a piece of evidence that would hold up. And you, he looked at her, you memorize his entire operation from his own office. He made me clean it every Thursday. He made a mistake every Thursday. He folded the papers and placed them in a leather document case. These alone would be enough to indict. Combined with Mr. Hollis's testimony and the records Mrs. Mendez collected, we have enough to bring charges against every associate Rourke had in the territory. He looked at Clara carefully. What about the families, the debts? Every debt in that ledger is fraudulent. Once the judge sees those numbers, every balance gets wiped clean. The families won't owe a penny. Clara nodded. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She looked at the desert horizon with the expression of a woman who had carried a weight for so long that putting it down felt strange. Not wrong, but strange, the way your body keeps bracing for something after the thing that hurt, it is gone. They rode into Prescott 3 days later. The town was a different world from Millhaven brick buildings, paved streets, a courthouse with stone columns, and a flag. Clara had never seen anything like it. She rode through the main street with her back straight and her chin up, covered in trail dust and fading bruises, and people stopped to look at the woman who rode like someone who had been somewhere and come back. The hearing took 4 days. Clara testified for 6 hours on the first day alone. She stood before Judge Whitfield, a thin man with white hair and spectacles, who listened without interrupting and recited numbers from memory. Every name, every original debt, every inflated figure, every phantom charge. The courtroom was very quiet while she spoke, the only sound the scratch of the court reporter's pen, trying to keep up with her. She didn't falter. She didn't hesitate. She spoke the way her father had taught her, clearly, precisely letting the numbers tell their own story. Hollis testified on the second day about the preacher, about Davis's barn, about the miners who had been threatened and beaten. He spoke in the flat, transactional voice of a man making a deal, and the deal held. Aldous testified on the third day. He broke down twice. The first time when he described the sound of Clara being kicked across the saloon floor. The second time when the prosecutor asked him why he hadn't intervened. Because I was afraid, Aldous said. Because I told myself it wasn't my business. Because every time I thought about doing something, I thought about my mother and the money I sent her, and I decided that keeping my job was more important than doing what was right. He looked at Clara, who sat in the gallery. I was wrong, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. Ethan testified last. He told the court about riding into Millhaven, about seeing Clara on the floor, about Rose's records and old Cutter's courage. He told them about the night the saloon burned. When the prosecutor asked him why he had gotten involved, Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Because I spent 5 years walking away from things that mattered, he said, and I was tired of the man I'd become. Bang. Judge Whitfield issued his ruling on the fourth day. Every debt in Rourke's ledger was declared fraudulent and void. Every family in Millhaven was cleared. Rourke's estate, what remained of it, was ordered to pay restitution. Hollis received immunity and was ordered to leave the territory. Arrest warrants were issued for court and priest. And Clara Voss was declared free of all obligations, financial and otherwise, to the estate of Silas Rourke. She walked out of the courthouse into the Prescott sunlight and stood on the steps. Ethan was waiting at the bottom, holding the reins of 2 horses. Aldous stood beside him. Rosa had arrived by stagecoach the day before and stood on the sidewalk crying openly, surrounded by 3 of the Millhaven families who had made the journey to hear the verdict. Clara looked at the sky. She looked at her hands scarred from glass and scrubbing and fighting the bruises on her wrists finally starting to fade to yellow. She looked at the people around her. I'm free, she said. She said it quietly, testing the word against her tongue. I'm free. You were always free. Rosa called up to her. You just didn't know it yet. Clara walked down the steps. She stopped in front of Ethan. He was wearing the hat with the bullet hole. He hadn't replaced it. You still owe me a hat, he said. You kept the old one. It's got character now. She reached up and touched the brim. Her fingers found the hole, the place where Rourke's bullet had passed through an inch away from ending everything. She felt the scorched edges of it. I don't know where I'm going, she said. I've got no home, no money until the restitution comes through. I don't even have a dress that isn't covered in someone else's blood. I've got a horse that needs riding, Ethan said. And I heard there's good land up in the Verde Valley, water, grass, the kind of place where a person could build something. He paused. Maybe two people. Clara looked at him for a long time. She thought about Daniel, sweet Daniel, who had borrowed money to buy medicine and died on a storeroom floor trying to protect her. About the letter she carried, his words pressed against her heart. He had known she would find a way. He had always known. She thought about her father who had given her numbers when he had nothing else to give. She thought about a stranger who had walked into a saloon and said, "That's enough," when no one else would. I have conditions, she said. Of course you do. I do my own books, every penny in and out. Nobody touches the ledger but me. Wouldn't dream of it. I eat at the table, not after, not the scraps. There's only one table and two chairs. And if you ever raise a hand to me, then you shoot me, Ethan said, and I'll deserve it. Clara looked at his face. She found what she was looking for, not a promise that life would be easy or that pain would never come again. Just steadiness. The quiet, unshakable steadiness of a man who had found something worth stopping for and was done running. All right, Ethan Cole, she said, let's ride. She took the reins of the second horse and mounted. Ethan mounted beside her. Aldous watched them from the sidewalk, his arms crossed, a crooked smile on his face. Where you headed? Ethan asked. Back to Millhaven, Aldous said. Town's gonna need a real lawman, someone who doesn't look at his boots when things get hard. You think they'll have you. I think they'll make me earn it, and I think I owe them that. Ethan extended his hand. Aldous took it. They shook, once firm, brief, the handshake of men who had been through something together and come out the other side changed. Rosa walked to Clara's horse and laid her hand on Clara's knee. You come back, mi hija. The shop will always be open. I'll come back, Rosa, with a proper dress and proper shoes and a hat for this man that doesn't have a hole in it. Bring me fabric from Verde Valley, the good kind. Cotton, not that rough stuff they sell to miners. I will. Rosa squeezed her knee and stepped back. Clara looked down at the woman who had hidden receipts under her floorboards for 2 years, who had fed her in secret, who had left her back door open at 5 in the morning for a stranger with a plan that should never have worked. Thank you, Clara said, for keeping count when nobody else would. Rosa's eyes filled. That's what we do, mi hija. We count, we remember, and we wait for the moment when the numbers finally matter. Bye. They rode north out of Prescott side by side, their horses falling into the same easy rhythm. The afternoon sun was warm on their backs. The road wound ahead of them through green hills toward a valley neither of them had seen yet, but both of them could feel the way you feel certain things before you can name them. They rode in silence for the first mile. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of a man building up a temper or a woman bracing for a blow. It was the silence of two people who had been through a fire together and come out the other side, knowing that some things didn't need words. Then Clara spoke. Ethan. Yeah, thank you for not leaving that first day. When I told you not to stay, you were trying to protect me. I was trying to keep you from ending up like everyone else who tried to help me. She looked at him. The bruises on her throat were yellow, now healing. Her split lip had scabbed over. Her hands were scarred but steady on the reins. Instead, you stayed, and everything changed. I didn't change anything. I sat at a bar and drank warm beer. You're the one who memorized a criminal empire on your hands and knees. You're the one who stood up to him. You're the one who hit him with a bottle and walked out of a burning building with the truth in your dress. I couldn't have done it alone. You were doing it alone for 8 months before I showed up. You just didn't know you were doing it. Clara was quiet for a moment. My father told me once, she said that the bravest thing a person can do isn't fight. It's count. Because fighting is loud and fast and over in a minute. But counting is quiet. Counting is patient. Counting waits and watches and remembers every single detail until the day comes when all those details add up to something that can't be denied. Your father was a smart man. He was a school teacher in Missouri who died of pneumonia when I was 16. He never had money, never had land, never had power. But he had numbers. and he gave them to me. She straightened in her saddle. Rourke kicked me every day for 8 months. And every Thursday, while I cleaned his office, I read his ledger, and I counted. I counted every lie. I counted every stolen dollar. I counted every family he destroyed, and I kept it all right here. She tapped her temple, where his boots couldn't reach it. Ethan looked at her, the sun catching the side of her face, her spine straight, the land opening up ahead of them into something green and possible. Clara Voss, he said, I believe you are the most dangerous person in Arizona territory. Remember that the next time you think about telling me to hide in a cellar. Ethan laughed, a real laugh, full and warm, the laugh of a man who had forgotten that such things were still available to him. Clara smiled, a real smile, the first one that reached her eyes since the day Daniel died. It transformed her face, cracking through the exhaustion and the pain and the long weight of it like sunlight through storm clouds after a very long winter. They rode north toward Verde Valley, toward land that didn't belong to anyone yet, toward a life that had no ledger and no debt and no locked doors. Behind them, Millhaven was already changing. Aldous would ride back and start earning his badge. Rosa would open her shop and hang a new sign. Widow Garner would tear up the debt notice she had kept folded in her Bible for 3 years. 17 families would sleep through the night without fear for the first time in a decade. The story would spread the way stories do in small towns and wide territories. People would talk about the saloon owner who cooked his books and got cooked in his own fire. They'd talk about the cowboy who stayed when any smart man would have ridden south. They'd talk about the deputy who broke his badge in half and found what was underneath it. But mostly, they would talk about the woman. The quiet one, the one who scrubbed floors and emptied spittoons and said yes, Mr. Rourke, for 8 months while she memorized every number in his fraudulent empire. The one who kept counting when the whole world told her she didn't count. The one who carried the truth against her skin, next to her heartbeat, through fire and gunfights, and 60 miles of open desert, and laid it on a judge's desk like a loaded gun. They'd say Clara Voss brought down Silas Rourke with a pencil and a memory and a spine made of iron. They'd be right. Because in the end, it wasn't the cowboy's revolver that freed Millhaven. It wasn't the deputy's shotgun, or the foreman's testimony, or the marshal's badge. It was a woman on her knees with a scrub brush in one hand and numbers in her head, waiting with the patience of a saint and the precision of a surgeon for the moment when the truth would finally be enough. Clara Voss never forgot a number in her life. And because of that, an entire town remembered what it meant to be free. Dude, if this story moved you the way it moved me in the telling, leave a comment below. Tell me which moment stayed with you. Tell me what city you were watching from, because this story has traveled further than I ever expected, and I want to know how far. If you're new here, welcome. This channel is built on stories like Clara's. Stories about ordinary people who find extraordinary courage in the most quiet, unexpected places. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you've been watching for a while, thank you. Truly, every comment, every person who comes back for the next story, that means everything. You are the reason these stories get told. Until next time, keep counting, keep standing up, and never ever let anyone else write your numbers.